What's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we're going to show you how to take your roof from looking like this to this. Now, you can go about this in a few ways. You could cut out a panel out of metal, weld it in, bodywork it slick, and paint it. You can just buy a panel that rivets on. A few different companies make that, but I don't know, it just doesn't look good to me. More recent years, a few companies have come out with full carbon fiber roof where you drill out all the spot welds, remove the glass, and you pull off the whole entire roof, and then you panel bond the carbon fiber back on, put the windshield back in, and then you're good. So since I've already had this windshield out of this car and it's already been put back in after One Motion did the roll cage, what I decided to do is I'm going to go to my parents' house where the other car is in the race car trailer, and we're going to use that roof as a mold to make a carbon fiber skin that we can then pop off, cut off this roof, leaving the structure around it without removing the windshield, and we can panel bond the carbon fiber panel that we make right on top of the roof. Today we're going to start it, so let's head on over to my parents and get this done. So here's how the car sits today. I'm not really sure what we're gonna do with this car. We stole the transmission, the electronics, the wiring harness out of it to build the new car. So a lot of money still needs to be spent to get it to the competition level. It's missing a dog box, quick change rear, and all the link electronics and wiring to abide by the rule book. But today, we're gonna use it as a mold. The steps to creating a wet leg carbon fiber or fiberglass panel using a car panel as a mold are as follows. First, wax your panel with Partall paste number 2. Next, spray or brush on your PVA release agent. Once dry, brush on a layer of epoxy resin. You can then add your carbon fiber and epoxy layers, ensuring all air is removed. Finally, spray or brush on your gel coat with wax. When using gel coat as the last layer of your panel, you must use one that contains wax because it will be exposed to air and needs the wax to cure properly. The car has been sitting for quite a while now, so I started the process off by cleaning the roof with a microfiber cloth and some rubbing alcohol. Using masking tape, aluminum tape, and plastic drop cloth, I masked off everything but the roof, creating a solid boundary of where we want our panel to begin. This will ensure we don't get any resin where we don't want it and will help minimize cleanup after the panel is removed. First step is to add a nice layer of Partall paste number 2 to your panel using a microfiber cloth and circular motion. PVA release agent can next be either sprayed or brushed onto the layer of Partall paste. If you don't have a spray gun, you can buy one of these Preble spray kits like I did. Link is down below. Once the PVA dried, I mixed up a batch of epoxy resin and brushed on a thick, even layer on the panel and laid my first layer of carbon fiber. Using a roller and a plastic spreader, I squeegeed out all the air to ensure the fabric was completely saturated with epoxy. After the first layer of epoxy dried, I roughed up the surface with 80 grit sandpaper in order to create mechanical adhesion for the layers of fiberglass. I then proceeded to repeat this process using 3 layers of chopped strand fiberglass and polyester resin. I again roughed up the surface with 80 grit sandpaper to create mechanical adhesion for the gel coat layers. Finally, I brushed on 2 thick layers of wax gel coat to the top of the fiberglass and allowed it to dry overnight. After 24 hours, the gel coat is nice and dry and ready to be sanded using a DA sander. In this case, I used the gel coat as a filler and sanded most of it away to smooth the panel. After the DA sander, I sprayed on a light coat of black primer to act as a guide coat so I could begin to block the roof by hand. I then added a thin layer of body filler in areas of the panel where the gel coat was not thick enough to block it smooth. So before I'm going to do any more sanding or priming, I'm going to pop it off just so I don't make any more of a mess of the trailer. I kind of already cleaned it up. And then we're going to do the rest of the sanding at my house. Let's go. The panel popped off super easy with no issues. I started with a plastic pry tool in one of the corners and worked my way along the side. Once I got to the halfway point, the panel popped right off, leaving just the wax on the roof of the car. On the underside of the panel, there's a perfect outline of the roof that I used as a guideline to cut off the excess material using a cutoff wheel. I touched up the edges using a sanding block to ensure my lines were perfectly straight and the exact size needed. After cutting the panel to size, You can then rinse the inside of it to dissolve and remove the water-soluble PVA film. Alright guys, we just got back home. Next up, we gotta sand the body filler that we just laid down. Once we get that pretty much nice and smooth, we can hit it with a layer of primer to get it all back in one color. This will allow us to see any imperfections, any pinholes and whatnot. We can then hit that with a glazing putty, smooth the surface, one more layer of primer, then we can finally get on with that yellow paint. Let's do it. Using a DA sander, I sanded the body filler with 80 grit and 180 grit until it was smooth and most of the filler was gone. I then hit the panel with a nice thick layer of high build primer. Once the panel's all one color, you can easily see any remaining imperfections and fill them in with glazing putty. I again created a guide coat using a thin layer of black primer so the panel can continue to be blocked by hand. So one big tip when doing body work and doing any kind of blocking is to use two different color primers. For example, a light gray and a black. First you spray the light gray, then you dust it with black. Then when you go to sand it, as you're sanding through, the areas that remain black are low and the areas that get sanded through to the light gray are high. So then you use this as your guide to quickly and efficiently flatten your entire panel. So don't forget that. Here, after a light sanding with 220 grit, you can quickly begin to see the highs and lows on your panel. In this case, the spots that are dark are slightly low, and the spots that are sanded through to the lighter color primer underneath are high. Use this as a guide to block your panel to perfection. So last night while I was on the internet looking for carbon fiber supplies, I came across what's known as spread toe carbon fiber fabric. Now what this is a weave pattern that looks like a checkerboard. So I thought this was sick. I got the checkerboard mats, got some checkerboard theme going on with the car. So I thought it would be way cooler to have the spread toe checkerboard as my headliner versus the regular layer of carbon fiber that I put down. So what we're going to do to fix this is we're going to use my vacuum bag setup and we're going to add the spread toe fabric to the inside of the panel. That will then become our headliner and you'll never know we messed up. So let's do it. The fabric that I went with is from Composite Envisions and the squares are approximately 1 inch. This pattern is made up of individual carbon fibers, so it comes with a plastic backing so the weave doesn't get distorted when you're installing. Once you take the backing off, it will literally just fall apart, so use caution when handling. The entire vacuum bag setup is linked below and costs around $100 on Amazon. The vacuum is a small 4.5 CFM pump. I had to buy a couple different fittings so I could use this quick release hose and this vacuum bag adapter which connects and seals the hose to your bag. To complete the setup, you must buy vacuum bags and gasket material. You also have to buy peel ply, which is a special material that absorbs excess resin from your carbon fiber layers, and breather material, which allows the air to properly vacuum out of your bag. I began the process by getting all my materials cut to size. You want your bag, peel ply, and breather material to be slightly larger than your carbon fiber panel. Once all the layers were ready, I mixed up a batch of epoxy and applied a thick, uniform layer using a brush. Next, I carefully laid the carbon fabric, plastic backing side up, on the epoxy and smoothed out all the air using a roller and a plastic spreader. Once the carbon was firmly adhered to the fabric and fully saturated with epoxy, I removed the plastic backing and inserted it into the vacuum bag I made using the gasket tape. You must ensure your vacuum bag is completely sealed or the setup will not hold vacuum. After ensuring the vacuum bag was completely sealed up with the gasket tape, I turned on the pump and quickly removed all the air out of the bag and held a tight seal. You will begin to see the peel ply material absorbing the excess resin if you did this correctly. After 24 hours to cure, pull the panel out of the bag and remove the peel ply and breather material from the panel. The peel ply gives you a nice uniform layer which has a gridded texture to it. This textured finish does not need to be sanded if you are adding another layer of carbon. In my case, since this layer is going to act as the quote-unquote headliner, I brushed on a thin layer of epoxy and used the torch to pop any air bubbles left in the layer. After drying for 24 hours, I wet sanded and blocked the panel with 600 grit sandpaper until it was smooth as possible. A good trick that I learned over on Street Bandito's YouTube channel is that when you get these cheap generic brushes, a lot of times the hairs will fall out, especially with the epoxy because it's really thick and sticky. It'll pull the hairs out. So what you do, you get a little super glue and you run a line down here at the bottom around the whole brush and it soaks on through and holds all the brushes in. Nice little tip. This is just wet from hosing it off. It's not cleared yet, but look how sick it looks. This thing turned out so sick. Now for the fun part. We can cut the roof off the car so we can test fit the roof skin to make sure it's dialed before we bond it. So here's my game plan. The inner pillar structure goes all the way around the perimeter of the roof. I'm going to use a small drill bit and drill a couple of holes around the edge of the inner structure. I can then use the holes to connect the dots with some masking tape to mark where to cut the roof. The interior of this car has been in and out so many times, so in sheer laziness I used a plastic drop cloth to protect the interior from any sparks and metal shavings from the angle grinder. Using the grinder, I cut through just the outer skin without damaging any of the inner structure. The roof removal went super smooth by using a few plastic trim tools to hold up the edges I already cut. Once free, I was able to lift the roof away from the car. Using a flap disc, I deburred the edges and made sure my lines were straight. The 3M panel bond that I'm using requires you remove the paint from the metal panel you are bonding to. Using a flap disc, I removed paint around the border of the roof. I then touched up any bare metal with the same purple paint the interior is painted with to prevent any future rusting. After doing a final fit and trim of the panel, we are ready to hit the inside layer, which will serve as our headliner, with a thick layer of Rust-Oleum TurboCan gloss clear. After allowing the clear coat to dry overnight, it was ready to be wet sanded up to 2000 grit to remove any orange peel. If you still see spots that haven't been sanded to a matte finish, you need to keep sanding. Just make sure you don't sand into your carbon layer. Now that all the orange peel is removed and the panel is sanded up to 2000 grit, you can hit it with Adam's 2-step compound and polish with the orbital polisher and get this thing looking like glass. After removing the paint from the metal roof using a flap disc, I applied the 3M panel bond around the border and evenly spread it using an etching brush. It is critical that you completely cover any bare metal using the adhesive to avoid any future rust. This particular adhesive has a 90-minute work time, 6-hour clamp time, and 24-hour cure. Working quickly, I carefully placed the carbon panel on the roof as perfect as possible. Once in the correct position, I clamped it down to secure it and remove any air gaps. Using my fingers, I spread a small amount of the panel bond around the border to ensure any seams or little holes were filled to make molding and blending the panel into the roof easier. After the 6 hours, I removed the clamps and weights from the roof and allowed it to dry overnight. Once cured, I molded the front edge of the panel to the roof using some fiberglass reinforced body filler. This eliminated any visible seam and made it look like one single panel. After sanding the filler, I hit the roof with one last layer of primer and guide coat. Once dry, the panel was blocked by hand using 600 grit sandpaper to prepare for the final stage of paint. Alright, so it's the next day after laying down the yellow paint. Got it nice and dry. Pretty much all that's left is to wet sand and polish it, along with the whole car with the new paint job. So here it is, let's check it out. Turned out super sick, no seams. You can't even tell. Bodywork turned out awesome, super slick. Checkered carbon pattern, gloss. It's really cool, it almost looks like, because it's really dark, it almost looks like it's just like a moonroof tinted. Turned out really nice. You got it all cut right up to the edge. Got everything panel bonded and sealed so we don't have to worry about any water or rust. But yeah, this thing turned out sick. Alright, thanks for watching the video, guys. Hope you liked it, and I hope you learned something today. Stay tuned for more content, and we'll see you in the next one.